Greetings, AP European History scholars, for our review on Unit 1, the Renaissance, the Rise of Nation-States, and Exploration. I'm looking at the review sheet here from top to bottom, and this is being addressed to my fourth period class. And what was the Renaissance? The Renaissance is this period of a rebirth of classical learning, classical Greek and Roman learning specifically. This includes a rise in individualism and secularism and the use of classical ideals in art, such as realism. Where did the Renaissance begin? It began in Italy and the Netherlands, and why there? Well, these two regions were on trade routes. The Italians are right in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and the Low Countries, which would be the Dutch and Belgium today, and some of the northern German states, are on the North Sea, the route up to the Baltic Sea between the Baltic and what would be England and France and the Low Countries today. Who was Niccolo Machiavelli, and what did he write? What was his purpose, and why is he a Renaissance writer? Well, Machiavelli is the Italian author of The Prince, and what he wants to get is an advisory job in the Florence governor of Lorenzo Medici. But the bigger picture here is Machiavelli's disturbed at the invasion of the Italian states by France, and the Italians are being invaded because they're disunited. They're divided. And what he's appealing to is a system of government, a way of governing that works. He's not appealing to Christian ideals. His focus is on the power of the ruler, on pragmatism, and not on any biblical, not on any Christian values. So there's kind of a decoupling of faith from government and the ideas here in The Prince, which makes it a Renaissance work. What is humanism? Humanism is the championing of human dignity, the potential of human beings, and by looking to the ancient world for examples, and one of the manifestos of the Renaissance is Pico de Mirandola's Oration on the Dignity of Man, that man is this creature of incredible potential and ability. Who created these works, and how do they show Renaissance values? You've got the David, you've got the freestanding bronze by Donatello of the adolescent David, which is very realistic, a depiction of David, who's the youngest of these brothers, who goes out and slays Goliath. And you see him straddling the head with this sword that he's leaning on. You have the other David, more well known, the Michelangelo, the 17-foot high idealized sculpture out of marble this David's by Michelangelo, and here you see man as depicted by David in all his beauty and glory. I mean, this guy is an Adonis, and he's just rippling. His muscles are just gorgeous, and both of these are using realism, although the Michelangelo is much more idealized. The creation of Adam on the Sistine Chapel ceiling is a Michelangelo work, and you see Adam here as this ideal man. He's the perfect human being who's been created by God, who's reaching out to him. Adam is strong, Adam is perfect. The Mona Lisa is a middle-class portrait, which shows the middle class is funding a lot of the Renaissance art as to show status. And this particular painting shows chiaroscuro, which is the use of light and darkness, the use of shadows to show perspective. The Pietà, another Michelangelo sculpture, which you see Mary with her dead son Jesus, who's come down off the cross, and you see this just very dramatic realism in the folds of the clothing and in the this prostrate body of Christ in the lap of his mother, his grieving mother. The Birth of Venus by Botticelli depicts a pagan scene, the birth of the goddess of love, Aphrodite, and our Venus is the Roman name. The Florence Cathedral Dome, this is designed by Brunelleschi, and he's copying the style of the Roman Pantheon in Rome. The School of Athens, this is a painting by Raphael, and right in the middle of it are these two famous, kind of on a stage, are these probably among the most famous of the Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle. And in the crowd of people, you have the famous Greek philosopher Heraclitus, you have Pythagoras, you have Euclid, you have Ptolemy, You have a god and a goddess in the corners of this scene. You have the goddess of light and music on the audience. That would be when we're looking at the painting on our left, Apollo. You have the goddess of wisdom on the right, and that would be Athena. How is the Renaissance in Northern Europe different from the Renaissance in Southern Europe? Well, the Northern Europe is more religious. It's not focusing on pagan themes, but on ancient scripture, on the church fathers, going back to the Greek scriptures, and a lot of this is for the purpose of reform. The church has become corrupt, and it's this Northern Renaissance which is going to feed into other Northern reformers such as Martin Luther, which we'll get to in our second unit. Examples of Northern European artists, you've got Jan van Eyck, E-Y-C-K, and you've got that Arnolfini wedding, another one of these middle-class portraitures of a wealthy family. You've got Albrecht Dürer, you've got those praying hands, it's a famous sketch of his. You've got Hans Holbein, who's a portrait artist. Some of his portraits that are most famous are the ones of Erasmus and Thomas More and of Henry VIII. You've got Desiderius Erasmus, who's a writer in praise of folly, which is a critique and a criticism of the corruption in the Catholic Church. It's a call to the Philosophia Christi, the following of Christ, his ethical behavior. And then you have Thomas More's Utopia, the depiction of an ideal society which is based upon learning and art. What is meant by the new monarchies? You'll also see this called the rise of nation states. And you have the beginning of the end of this fragmentation of the Middle Ages, this divided government, these fiefdoms that are run by feudal lords, and you have the consolidation of power into larger nations controlled by a king. And how did the new monarchs come to power? Well, in England, it's by civil war. You have the House of Lancaster defeats the House of York in the War of the Roses, and the Tudors come to power. In Spain, you have in 1469 the marriage of Isabel of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, and they are going to unite northern Spain into what becomes sort of the core of a reunited Spain. In France, you have the victory over the English by the French king over in the 100 Years' War. You have the annexation of Burgundy. And how did these monarchs stay in power? Well, in England, you have the use of the Star Chamber. This is a royal court that trumps all the other ones in the land. You have the banning of private armies by the previously independent feudal lords. In France, you have the imposition of the taille. This is a land tax, and not calling the States General into session. This is going to be for, it's like 175 years or so that the king is he's not going to be, looking for counsel from the French lords. In Spain, the Spanish drive out the Moors in 1492 from their last stronghold at Granada. You have the Inquisition hunting down disloyal subjects, and everyone's required to convert. And the Moors and the Jews have a choice of converting, leaving, or dying. And you have the forced expulsion of the Jews. So you have this sort of monolithic Catholic faith is imposed upon a country that had been taken over in 711 by the Moors, who are finally kicked out in 1492. Why did the late 1400s begin the extensive overseas period of exploration and discovery? Well, some things to consider. Once the AP asked about technological reasons, and that would include the caravel, this new maneuverable ship. You have, by way of astronomy, by the sextant, the quadrant, the astrolabe, and of course the compass, are allowing mariners to figure out where they are when they're in the middle of nowhere with just really the stars to guide them. You have better map making, which is called cartography. Some of this is coming from the School of Navigation set up by Prince Henry of Portugal. And you have other reasons. You have the desire to spread the Christian faith, this crusading spirit, that finally the Christians have kicked the Muslims out of Spain. In the Reconquista, you have the conquistadores are going to follow the Spanish explorers and colonizers in what will be Latin America. But you have this belief that there are Christian kingdoms in Africa. Christian kingdoms in Africa. And you have this idea that Prester John is this Christian king, and there's this idea of coming to the aid of Christians who have been isolated over time. And you also have, and this is a key one, you have trade reasons for overseas exploration, and that is the Muslims are controlling the eastern part of the Mediterranean, and they're the middlemen. They're jacking up the costs of these very valuable but highly desired goods, woods like teak and mahogany, and silks and porcelains, and of course spices, which had many of them were more valuable in weight than gold. So this is driving the Portuguese and then the Spanish exploration. They're first out of the gate. Remember, the Iberian Peninsula is sticking right out there into the Atlantic, so they've got the geographic advantage, kind of like Italy did and the Dutch did earlier in the Renaissance. How were Germany and Italy unique in the 1400s and 1500s? Well, they're divided into many, many smaller states. There's about 300 German states in Italy. If you look on a map, it's it's a good dozen states or so. What was the Holy Roman Empire, and who chose its emperor? Well, the Holy Roman Empire is another name for what we would call, quote-unquote, Germany. Germany doesn't become a country until the Franco-Prussian War from 1870 to 71, so that's coming much later. But Germany is a place of, they speak German and you have German culture, is divided up in these autonomous, semi-autonomous, semi-independent German states. The seven bigger ones have what are called electors, and 7 electors are choosing the emperor, who is in a sense beholden to these electors. To what extent did women participate in the Renaissance? Okay, this is part of the politically correct business of the AP. Some names you should know, because they've asked the question about women in the Renaissance. Isabella d'Este, that's D''ESTE, Isabella d'Este. She's a famous patroness of the arts in Mantua. She sponsored all sorts of artistic activities. She was a regent in the absence of her husband, who was often away on diplomatic business. Christine de Pisan, Pizan, this is an Italian woman who married a Frenchman, and when he got back to France with his new Italian bride, he dies. So to support her mother, her niece, and her 2 children, she proceeds to write a series of books, 41 books of poetry and essays, which were widely read, and she's involved in discussions and teaching of men, and she's kind of a female intellectual of the time period. Some queens to know, and we're going to cover these people in more detail when we get to our units on constitutionalism versus absolute monarchy, and when we look at the Reformation. But Elizabeth I, she's Renaissance era. You've got this golden age, think Shakespeare. And Elizabeth I she's not going to marry. She's nicknamed the Virgin Queen. Her mother's Anne Boleyn, who's killed by her father, Henry VIII, one of these many wives that die. And she is, very jealous of her power. She does not get deeply involved in the religious wars of Europe. She follows what's called the Via Media, or the Middle Way. And in practice, it's not technically, religious laissez-faire. It's not technically religious tolerance, but in practice, she's not hunting people down. In the meantime, here across the way, during the 30 Years' War, the Germans are, the third of Germany dies, and you've got about a tenth of France dies in the wars of religion there. So Elizabeth is keeping the peace in England. She also turns back the invasion. Her sailors defeat the invasion by Philip II to try to bring England back into the fold after it leaves under Henry VIII, leaves the Catholic Church. Isabella of Spain, remember she marries Ferdinand, and she's a powerful monarch. She's going to be involved in raising an army to kick the last of the Moors out of Granada. She's for religious unity. She's going to demand religious conformity, and the Jews are expelled from Spain. And she's going to be involved with her husband, of course, in funding the beginning of this exploration, which starts with Columbus overseas. Another woman to think about is Catherine de' Medici. She's an Italian who marries the King of France, and she is after her husband dies, she's got 3 sons who all come to the throne, and she's really the power behind the throne. At times she's a regent. A regent is a person who rules when the new king is too young or is away on business. And she is going to help launch what's called the St. Bartholomew Day Massacre of Protestants who are in opposition to the Catholic Valois monarch. Keep in mind here, though, most women during the Renaissance are poor. Most women are married to farmers, and most women, like their men, are illiterate. But the middle class women are going to be they're going to be educated. They're going to be educated. These girls are going to grow up being educated along with their brothers. And part of the deal being a middle class woman is you're supposed to display the status of your home. So middle class women, they could play instruments. They could sing. They knew poetry. They were literate. And again, they were expected to show the culture, show the sort of the highbrow status of a home. And some of them, like Isabel d'Este, became patronesses of the arts. So these are just some thoughts here on what we've gone over. These are all represent specific items that will be on the test. So heads up, study early, study smart, get a good night's rest, and good luck.